Um, okay, we'll get going. Other people will join us quite soon, I'm sure. And welcome everyone to the launch webinar for the Not the Nobel Prize. You'll see that if you look behind me, our logo. And my name is Henry Lusengore. I'm the CEO of Promoting Economic Pluralism. And we are leading this campaign, working with a range of partners, including Economy for the Common Good, Wellbeing Alliance, Rethinking Economics, and others. I will give you a link at the end so you can see further information about the whole campaign. And we're using the 50 years anniversary of the creation of the Nobel Prize in Economics to start a debate about whether it's been a force for good or bad, but also to do a process which is very different from the one used in the Nobel Prize, which is more inclusive and allows everyone to nominate who they think the important thinkers are and doers at the moment that are actually addressing the real issues we face in the 21st century. And I'll give you at the end a little sort of instruction, show you the platform where you can start nominating and so on. So the main business of this webinar is to have a discussion about the role, benefits or otherwise, of the Nobel Prize in Economics, and whether it's a real prize, what it's really called, and more. And we've got a great panel to start the discussion. Christian Felber, who started the Economy for the Common Good, is a multiple author, has really challenged what's the purpose of the economy is for. We've got Nicholas Gruen from Australia, who's a well-known commentator in Australia and globally on economic issues. And Anne Pettifor is currently not visible because her video isn't quite working, but hopefully will come through, who has been worked on policy, promoting different thinking, particularly about money in economics for some time. So where I'm going to start is ask Christian to give us a quick 5 to 10 minutes on the sort of basics about the Nobel Prize in Economics to start the discussion. Then I'll ask Anne and Nicholas to respond to that, and then we'll open it up to other contributions. So Christian, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, good. Hello, everybody. I will start with a very strong opinion on the supposed Nobel Prize for Economics, as it simply does not exist. I start with some hard facts. Alfred Nobel did not dedicate a prize for economics. He dedicated prizes for 3 natural sciences, as is widely known, physics, chemistry, and medicine, and additionally the prize for literature, and on the suggestion of Bertha von Suttner, the Nobel Prize for Peace. But he very intentionally did not dedicate any prize for a social science, such as the economic science, and he even expressed his explicit disdain for economic science. So the prize is simply not included in his will. It was established in the 1960s from the Swedish Riksbank for mainly 2 reasons. On the one hand, it was searching for a strong accent to celebrate its 300th anniversary. And on this occasion, it tried to take revenge of the Swedish government, which made its way through against the will of the Swedish Riksbank in some fields of economic policy, such for instance, affordable housing for the Swedish people and a low unemployment rate. And the Riksbank would have preferred a lower inflation rate and set a different priority. And the rising neoclassical economic science was a good opportunity for the Riksbank to counter the Swedish government, which, by the way, was a social democratic government, and they founded a prize to counter social democratic but also Keynesian economic policies. And they were personally very strongly linked to a global network which we know as the Montpellier Society, founded by the Austrian economist, under quotation marks, because he's not only Austrian, Friedrich von Hayek, but he is also maybe the most known representative of the Austrian School of Economics. And his network, the Montpellier Society, is very narrowly linked to the awarding committee of the Nobel Prize, which was established on the initiative of the Reichsbank, and now very important, against the will of the Nobel family, without asking the Swedish parliament, and also against the initial objections of the Swedish Academy of Science. So there were severe obstacles against the establishment of the prize. But getting back to the basics, Alfred Nobel expressed his explicit contempt for economics. Economics is not a natural science, but a social science, very clearly. And from a view of history of science, one could also think that, or argue that, economics is a daughter of moral philosophy. So why dedicate the prize to the daughter, economics, and not to the mother, moral philosophy? Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. He is regarded as the first national economist, but he was not an economist in this way, but he was a philosopher. These are formal arguments, and I would like to conclude my first round with my strongest point, which is another one. My strongest point is that the Nobel Prize is not a prize established by the Swedish state to honor Alfred Nobel. In this case, it would not pose a problem to change the prize's dedication after the death of Alfred Nobel. The point is that the Nobel Prize was invented, dedicated, and financed by a person, by Alfred Nobel. And to me, this makes it impossible, from a viewpoint of decency and respect, to add a different prize to his prizes. Neither economics, nor ecology, nor ethics or philosophy. I would say that his prize should be untouchable, and every attempt to connect a different prize invented by others is contrary to his will and is not correct. It's an illegitimate appropriation of his name, of his idea, and the reputational capital associated to the prize. So I consider the decision of the Nobel Foundation to accept an additional prize, by the way, and to reject others, because there was also the attempt, for instance, of Jacob from Uexküll to establish a prize for ecology. This attempt was rejected by the Nobel Foundation, but accepting one of the many attempts to establish a different prize, I consider a severe offense against Alfred Nobel. And to conclude, Jacob von Uexküll founded the Right Livelihood Award. That's correct and fine. The Swedish Reichsbank could have founded the Swedish Reichsbank Prize for Economic Science, would have been fine as well. Or if you want so, the Reichsbank Revenge Prize against the Swedish government would also have been fine, fair enough. But keep your hands and your interests, especially your interests and politics, off a dead man and his will.
Thank you very much, Christian. So you would abolish the Nobel Prize, or remove the Nobel name from it anyway.
I would follow the Nobel family's and his descendants' proposal, just to remove the name of Alfred Nobel from the prize. Not even in the memory of him. No, it's the Swedish Riksbank prize, and then the prize can continue, but without the family's name and without Alfred Nobel's name.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to Nicholas, as Anne's still not visible, though I don't know if she's going to become. Nicholas. Oh. Sorry, you. I can't. You are still on mute.
I've just unmute.
Sorry.
I've just unmute.
Okay,
can you all hear me acceptably now?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
Okay. All right. So I thought I would ask a few questions or organise what I'm going to say. First question is it good to have a prize in economics? I think the answer is yes. The second question, which I'll get onto in a minute, is what should it be like? What would my favourite, what would a prize in economics that was good for economics look like? And I'll talk a bit about that. Should it be called the Nobel? Now, I agreed to do this talk when Henry asked me to, on the grounds that, on the understanding that I wasn't required to argue against it being called the Nobel Prize. And so in a sense, I think I'm presenting myself to you as an unusually objective person who came upon this question, whether we should call it the Nobel, quite recently. I was aware, I had some knowledge of its background. I knew it wasn't an original Nobel. What I was unaware of was the things that Christian has made clear, the opposition, the active opposition, if we can project it back that far, of Alfred Nobel, the opposition of the Nobel family. I presume at some stage somebody was lent on and somebody was seeking to be accommodating, allowed the word Nobel to appear at the end of a string of about 8 words. And of course, this was a brilliant piece of brand extension. But brand extension is normally done by the owners of brands. But here, it was a kind of cuckoo operation. And so it's really a pretty outrageous thing. And we are in a discipline in which almost almost everyone, I'm just saying that to be diplomatic, everyone, any respectable economist understands that misleading conduct degrades markets. And it's quite clear that calling the thing the Nobel Prize, having all the dramaturgy of the Nobel Prize tied up in it, is misleading conduct. So if the first central bank in the world wants to get involved in that, well, good on it, but I don't agree with it. Another question is it ideologically biased? I think the answer to that is it probably is. It needs to be said that some quite left-wing people have been given the Nobel Prize, but a pretty small minority. Gunnar Myrdal is one. There are 1 or 2 others that don't come into my head at the moment, but are definitely there. And there have been plenty of people, if you like, from the centre left who have won the Nobel Prize: Paul Krugman, Schiller, and so on, or what is now the centre left. But I don't regard that. I mean, I guess I would also, but I like the idea of the prize being given for some kind of very high level of excellence, and if it's going to be an intellectual prize, then for intellectual excellence. So I don't particularly like the idea of applying a kind of fairly low-grade identity politics to the story, but I think there is no question that there are lots of people from outside the stable, the neoclassical stable, if you like, who could be tapped. And the Nobel Committee itself has done quite a good job of that in a few cases. Elinor Ostrom was an inspired choice, as well, and Daniel Kahneman. I think I'm not that as impressed with his work, but it's clearly up there with an awful lot of the economists and relevant to economics. And so that was, again, an ecumenical approach and something that I would endorse. So I wanted to get to the final comment I want to make, or the final observations I want to make, which is what should it be like? And I'll start with a pretty radical thought and then make some more practical and you may find less radical thoughts. I actually, the more I think about economics, the more I think of Keynes's comment that if only economics was more like dentistry. And I would go further, that economics and the academy generally, certainly in the social sciences, I doubt this is quite so true in the natural sciences, has got a thing about disciplines which is very like corporations. So, you know, are you a Coke man or a Pepsi man? I use the word man advisedly. It's very common today for people to begin sentences with expressions like speaking as an economist or speaking with my economist hat on. I hate that sort of stuff. It is as if a discipline is a kind of an echo chamber, a kind of a brainwashing, and you then walk out looking at things like an economist, rather than looking at things like a human being with various bits of your training helping you see certain things. So one little formulaic way I put this to young economists is that they probably think that being an economist is about 90% knowing the discipline and about 10% fitting the discipline to any given problem. I would say it's about 20% the discipline, about 30 or so percent other disciplines and other things that you need to take into account and try and accommodate within your judgment, and the rest is how you apply it, the intelligence, the imagination with which you apply it in situ, on the merits, in particular contexts. To get more practical about that, let me give you some ways in which I would like to see the prize, the Riksbank's prize for economic excellence, become more ecumenical. It has got a thing about discipline building, whether or not the discipline building is useful. I had a debate which people can look up on the internet if they like with Paul Krugman about this. I said that Paul Krugman's prize for the work that he got the Nobel for should be called an Academy Award. It was a prize for building the discipline further in ways that could have been predicted at the time would amount to very little. I'm very happy to give Krugman the Nobel Prize for his journalism, his brilliance, his range, but the actual thing that he was given the prize for, it was pretty useless and could have been anticipated and was anticipated by people like John Hicks. Then there are people who, when I made these comments about Krugman responded by saying, well, there were people who were building new assumptions into economics. He was trying to build more realistic assumptions into economics. Then there are the crazies, Ed Prescott and real business cycle theory, simply idiotic theories and a complete misunderstanding of what science is and how science involves trade-offs between realism, generality, tractability, and so on. So those Nobel Prizes and that work was actively set the discipline back, so I wouldn't be giving a Nobel Prize for that. I think the Nobel Prize has shown too little regard for powerful empirical work. So people like Carden Kruger, David Auteur, now he's got plenty of time and he may well get one. Piketty, Sayers, and so on, and Piketty certainly, and maybe others will get Nobel Prizes. Atkinson might be one there. I also like the Then there are sort of left field theoretical development. Minsky would be an example of someone who should have got one, I think, but again, I'm a bit out of my field there, and Steve might have some advice for me there. And I imagine there are quite a few post-Keynesians who were certainly up to the standard of some of the people who got Nobel Prizes. The other thing I'd say is that if you think economics ought to be thought about as more like dentistry, a more practical discipline, then you would tune into something that Henry said, which is economic thinkers and economic doers. And a list of those who might have been given the the Riksbank Prize start with Muhammad Yunus. Well, he doesn't need one. He picked up a real Nobel, the Peace Prize, but he's the founder of microcredit. Toyota invented the Toyota production system, a new way of decentralizing decision-making within a hierarchy. If you don't want to give it to an organization, you give it to Edward Stemming or some of the people who are involved in that. I would give it to Richard Stallman, the great propagandist of free and open software. And then Linus Torvalds, the architect of the Linux, the first open source, the first really powerful open source software. And I think I'll end on what might be an unpopular point, but if one is trying to do this in an ideologically balanced way, one would probably also give it, at least one might have given it until maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, to Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg for doing something quite remarkable with new technology. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. And it's good, some inspiring sort of thoughts as who might be nominated for our prize amongst doers, maybe. Now I'd like to go to Anne. Unfortunately, Anne, video is not working, but we can hear her. So I will switch. I've switched you on, Anne.
Thank you so much, Henry. And I do apologise. I have I had the techies on my computer system on Friday, and I'm afraid they've done something to my system that has made the video not work, for which I do apologise most sincerely. I want to begin by saying that I came to economics as a practitioner, if you like. I'd worked in the field of sovereign debt, and I'd worked in particular on the sovereign debts of the poorest countries and how these could be resolved in a way that was orderly. And I'd done that for many years. And it was only when I retired from that work, if you like, that I began to think about the economic system. And so in 2003, I edited a book called The Real World Economic Outlook, which argued that as in opposition to the IMF, world economic outlook, the real world economic outlook was really quite different and quite frightening. And then in 2006, in a sort of, in a mood of desperation, I wrote a book which the publisher insisted on calling The Coming First World Debt Crisis. And at the time, of course, it fell like a lead balloon and was not taken seriously and dismissed. I tell you this simply because I think that the Nobel Prize is but a symptom, and the nature of this Swedish bank's awarding this prize is something of a symptom of the crisis that the profession as a whole faces. The fact is that the Nobel Prize is, if you like, it's a very crude expression, but in English we talk about lipstick on a pig, basically. The fact is that the profession is failing in its main duty, which is to provide economic analysis, sound economic analysis and guidance, both to policymakers, but also to the public at large. And it has failed in that. The fact that I, as someone who was not an academic economist, who was not a professional economist, was able to argue back in 2003 and then again in 2006, that if you like, the tectonic plates of the economic system were shifting and were about to crash, and that no other economist of any great prominence was willing to argue that or able to argue that. seems to me to expose the kind of vacuum at the center of economics, which is that it is, of course, based on its micro foundations and uses microeconomic reasoning to arrive at macroeconomic conclusions, and those conclusions are wrong and flawed and mistaken. So for me, the Nobel Prize and the fact that it's not part of the original Nobel family's intention, that it is the central bank of Sweden, which everyone knows is an extremely orthodox mainstream bank in its thinking. One of my problems with it is that when I worked at the IMF and the World Bank, when I worked with the IMF and the World Bank in Washington on the resolution of sovereign debt crises, one of our main opponents was the Swedish Bank of, was the Central Bank of Sweden, which had very, very archaic views, if you like, of how to resolve sovereign debt crises, and archaic views about the appropriate economic policies, which were reflected, for example, in the advice given to Argentina, which led to Argentina's default in 2001. Argentina is the longest lasting client of the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund has been advising Argentina for more than 50 years, and on the basis of mainstream economics. And that mainstream economics is what is endorsed by the Swedish bank, central bank, and awarded prizes for. And so for me, I would like us to open up this discussion and acknowledge that the problem is yes, this formal kind of awarding of prizes by a central bank to a whole economics profession. But the really bigger issue is the failures of the profession as a whole and the weaknesses of the profession as a whole, and why it is now held, if you like, in some contempt by presidents, prime ministers, as well as the public, and why it's not taken seriously, and why it has done so little as a profession to address the current crisis that we're in. For me, those are the big issues that the Nobel Prize is simply trying to camouflage and is refusing to address seriously.
Thanks very much, Anne. I would now like to open out discussion and request other people to who would like to raise issues. Now, the way to do it is to go to the chat button and choose the raise hand, and I'll come to people, unmute them, and they can then speak.
And if you can't see the raised hand sign, go to participants, and then you will be able to see, I think, the raised hand sign. Oh, I see, yeah.
If people are ready to, Mark Landon. Mark, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you very much. It's been fascinating to listen to. And I think the point that Anne made at the end about the purposes of the Nobel Prize and how it was used, as Christian pointed out, to give a certain branding to economic practice fits very much into the kind of appropriation of knowledge and to valorize the kind of knowledge which supports the current power structures and undermines and sidelines knowledge which challenges it. And I think we've seen that process accelerate under austerity in the kind of the sort of Western world. And of course, austerity has been visited on the developing world for decades, and I think the IMF have never been held to account to the utter destruction that their policies have wrought across Africa and Latin America. So there's a certain amount of kind of truth and reconciliation which should be, people being held to account. But most importantly now, we need to use the kind of recognition of the climate crisis to come together and more effectively challenge these icons of power. The examples in Glasgow, where I live, are Strathclyde University, Glasgow University. Glasgow University in particular has a kind of iconic status because of Adam Smith's link to it. But we've still got Anthony Muscatelli there as the head of the university, as a consultant to the Scottish Government. And it just feels to me like there's a huge amount of evidence which, as Anne and the other speakers have spoken out, is to say that this is the emperor's new clothes. It's they have begun to. I know that Steve was up in Glasgow a kind of year or so ago at one of the economic forums, and it's not that people aren't trying to do this, but I think what you're trying to do with not the Nobel Prize is an important role in trying to reach out to the wider media. And my interest in particular is about how do we develop economic literacy. And one of the ways we develop economic literacy is by showing people the bullshit, frankly, that is being paraded and being used to destroy, many opportunities for a much more egalitarian and prosperous and balanced world.
Steve, you've started sharing your screen. Is that on purpose? Can you unshare it?
Henry, I believe as admin, you will have overriding rights, and so you should be able to stop the screen share, I think, from your screen as well.
I don't know. I can't sort of do that. I'm going to, Steve.
Steve, you're sharing your screen with us, and you're on mute. You're on mute. No,
you're still on mute. Can you unmute? I've been unmuting you. I think we've been doing it at the same time.
Right.
Okay.
Steve, are you there? No?
I'll hang on a second.
Right, you're unmuted now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. What I was trying to show is the side of the physics prizes versus the economics prizes, because one thing which is the economics prize managed to get away with, and I'll talk about this when I'm in the session at 6 o'clock tonight as well in more detail, is that to get a prize in physics, what you're doing has to be experimentally verified. So the last prize most people would be aware of would be the prize to Peter Higgs back in 2013 for the theoretical discovery of mechanism which basically we know the Higgs boson, the idea of the fundamental particle that gives physical objects mass. When did he do that work? About 30 years ago. Why did he get the prize till 2013? Because it wasn't experimentally verified until then. Whereas all the prizes in economics virtually are for theoretical advances, most of which were contradicted within a year of them being developed. And my favorite, of course, being the one to the winners for the efficient markets hypothesis, whose hedge fund collapsed the year after. So what you see in physics is a respect for experimental verification of theoretical ideas. What you see in economics is a promotion of theoretical ideas without experimental verification and often with outright contradiction. And it's an insult to the other prizes to have one for economics. Right.
I'd like to just go back to the panel quickly, because I think I'd like to pick up two things that, I think it's an interesting point of responsibility and accountability if, that the real world results turn out wrong. And I think it's interesting, especially with developing countries where there've been lots of sort of developments of ideas to explain it's all down to culture or something, the fact that development developing economies have not succeeded in spite of decades of advice from the IMF. And this, I think, is also related to the fact that should people, before they get a prize, actually have some demonstrated positive results in the real world. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll have a.
Nicholas. Okay, go for it.
I mean, I think the example that Steve chose was the right one, which is that they actually got a chance to go and put their theories to work in the market, and their fund blew up. Unfortunately, more generally, the idea that we can verify these theoretical constructions of economists is it's not really like natural science. We can't do. I mean, we hear in our discipline, holding all other things being equal. That's because experiments are designed precisely to hold other things equal in order to actually look at whether certain relationships are as posited. We can't do that in social science. So
should we see it more as like the Peace Prize, where is the peace? Are the positive results?
Well, I suppose I actually think that we have a very poor understanding of what social science is. In fact, in my notes for the talk that I gave, I actually include, when I was talking about a more ecumenical approach to giving the prize, I mentioned, but then didn't read it out, didn't get to that part of my notes, but I mentioned the philosophy of social sciences. So there's a philosopher of social science, I think out of Durham, called Nancy Cartwright, who should be required reading for any person learning about microeconomics, any person learning. I mean, it's sort of extraordinary now that I've come to learn more about the discipline of evaluation, which is usually evaluation of government programs, that economists don't get taught any of that. Her perspective on these things is very helpful to someone who's trying to work out what a social science is, what its relationship to evidence is, what questions that make sense are, and what questions that don't make sense are. And a lot of the questions that are put in, so in the wake of what I might call the freakonomics revolution, we have all these questions being asked of the world as if the world was arranging itself for us to do multiple regressions to get answers in. So do lower class sizes improve outcomes in schools? Now, it's not a stupid question, but it's not a very good question, because if you're running a school, it'll be a geography class or a history class or a maths class, and it'll be in a place, and you'll have a budget, and there will be all kinds of special things that you need to consider. And Nancy Cartwright's stuff is about how you kind of try to understand that and unpick some of the kind of boys' own philosophy of science a la Karl Popper that you've been taught in your economics degree.
Great. So a different approach. Anne, what would you like to say?
I simply just want to say this, that I think there's an awful lot that is verifiable about economics. We just have to look around us. We are living in a world of economic failure. One of the reasons we have the rise of populism is that the economy has failed millions of people. And it's very, very obvious. It's very obvious. It's as obvious as it was in the 1930s under the gold standard. But what we have is a failure of analysis. Now, I mean, I think at a micro level, verifying theories is probably quite difficult. But actually at a macro level, we can verify the fact that the economic system is not working. Certainly not for the majority. It's working for a tiny minority. And this is blatantly obvious. Everyone can see this. It doesn't require scientific enterprise, if you like, because everyone can see the way the economic system is failing, and they're very angry about it, and they're reacting to that. Economists stand aloof. Economists say nothing to do with me, Gov. This is nothing, this is not our fault. This is the politicians, or it's the weather, or it's, I don't know, all kinds of things. It's never anything to do with economists. And so, when I think of geologists, geologists took some time before they began to understand the movement of tectonic plates. But geologists can now give us some warning and can explain tectonic plates to us, and can explain the impact that their movement will have on millions of people. Economists can't, or don't seem able to do that. But I mean, I'll never forget, right at the beginning of the crisis, 2007-8, I constantly perused the meetings of the Royal Economic Society, hoping that there were going to be economists there that were going to explain to us what had happened, why it had happened, and how we could fix it. And it was quite, the agenda of the Royal Economic Society never, ever included the macroeconomy. They were never looking at the tectonic plates of the system. No, but they were focused on some tiny micro things about, whether or not, it was so micro, I can barely remember them. So I think that's, for me, the issue, that there is an awful lot that is verifiable about the failure of the system. And about, the second thing, I think, was it Mark that raised this point? What is verifiable is that the system has led to massive greenhouse gas emissions, and that these emissions have caused enormous harm to the physical system. And we need to do something about that. But again, economists don't really talk about that enough. I know Steve has done work on Nordhaus and so on, and he should talk about that a little bit more. But they still stand aloof from all of these really big, important debates. I can't imagine a geologist standing aloof from a tsunami and saying, this is nothing to do with me, Gov. This is natural forces. This is nature. This just happened as a result of natural forces. They would not have the intellectual chutzpah, if you like, to do that. But economists can do that.
Christian.
Yeah, I would like to add to some ideas that Nicholas, but also Steve have already put. First, empirical verification as a precondition for acknowledging a researcher's work. Ironically, it was Maurice Ellis, one of the prize winners, who said that if a theory is not proven empirically, this is not science. But his words were unheard by the Nobel Committee. But I think this is still not enough, because we are not talking about natural sciences, as already has been said as well. We are talking about a social science. This is why I very much like the idea to combine economic thinking with economic doing. And from an epistemological point of view, this might be called pragmatism. And pragmatism means that we don't do science for its own sake, but there has to be a positive impact as for the goals and values of the society. And only if a theory is not only empirically verified, but also doing a positive impact on society that we can evaluate, then it's a prize-worthy theory. One example, and she's the only woman who got the prize, is Elinor Ostrom. But she gave a theory on commons, and many thousands, tens of thousands commons work and have a positive impact. I think this is a prize-worthy holistic package of theory, methodology, practice, and positive impact. Same could be with cooperatives, for instance, or with complementary currencies, for instance, with fair trade, with ethical banks, for instance. But also, which I like, which is a bit closer to theory, John Maynard Keynes' clearing union, which was not implemented, but it was a brilliant, a lucid idea. And if it had been implemented, and if it had a positive impact, then this would have been a pragmatistic theory, because it would have been implemented into practice, and it would have had a positive impact working against trade imbalances and against financial instability. So this would be one way to go, connecting theory with practice and with positive impact. Here is another point. Natural scientists consider economics as a value-free science, which is a strong betrayal, self-betrayal, and betrayal of the audience, because economics is always about goals and values. It's by nature a normative science, and this is why I would deem it legitimate to link economic research and theories to goals and values. And maybe a last point, adding to Nicholas. He already said that he made a proposal of a wide range of alternative prize-worthy persons. I would like to remember, besides from having only one woman out of 85 prize winners, we only have 2 non-white prize winners out of 85. And between 1990 and 95, 5 of 6 prizes went to the University of Chicago, which is an extreme concentration. I would call it an ideological concentration, instead of being a plural prize for a plurality of theories, a plurality of approaches, an interdisciplinary, Nicholas called it ecumenic, and I would add even an intercultural approach. Because why not giving the prize to the Buen Vivir approach in Latin America? Or why not giving the prize to Vandana Shiva in India, who is practicing a different approach to nature, a different understanding of gender, and a different understanding of agriculture. Of course, there should always be a theoretical element, but which then is practically implemented. The only point is then we are getting a bit closer to the right livelihood award. And maybe if we think about such a new prize with new criteria, we should think about what's the difference and what's the division of labor with the right livelihood award.
Thanks very much, Christian. Now, I just want to bring in a couple of people with their hands up. We've got 5 more minutes, so you will need to just make quick comments, and then I'll go back round the panelists. I need to have 5 minutes at the end just to show you the platform where you can nominate people for our Not the Nobel Prize and where we go next. So I'll just ask Nicolette, I've unmuted you, to come in quickly with your thought.
I think the recent answers have probably addressed what I was going to ask, but I just wanted to hear more about what you would actually want a prize for economics, the criteria for a prize for economics. I'm totally convinced that there's a huge amount wrong with the I won't call it the Nobel Prize, but the Swedish Bank Prize.
Thank you. And Andy, I brought you in.
Thanks. Well, I was just thinking, as several of the panelists were speaking, actually, that the word that has kind of got dropped out of the whole thing within the formal confines of the Swedish Bank Prize is the word political. Economics was, as we all know, originally the study of, it was called political economy. It was the study of social and political phenomena and economic phenomena, which didn't really seek to position the investigation of those things as a kind of narrow, pseudo-scientific, technocratic, mathematically based subject. But as decades went on, not only did that happen, it served the political interests of, frankly, the ruling class. Because lo and behold, all of the research that was done, pretty much, with 1 or 2 exceptions, went towards demonstrating that the present system, that is free market capitalism, was in the best interests of all. And I think that, you know, to echo something that Christian said, that the idea that economics is a value-free science is it's a nonsense, because it's not a science and it's not value-free.
Henry, you're muted. Henry, you're in mute mode.
Sorry, Nicholas, if we go back to you first for a final comment.
I guess my final comment is that, well, what's in my mind is a response to Anne, who said that the facts are in and that the system hasn't worked. And I think that's true. But the question is, what would work? And there isn't good empirical verification of any people arguing various lines. And in some ways, one would never think that there would be. So, you know, you'll have people saying, just to sort of make it very simple, think of Keynes versus Hayek. Now, I happen to think that Keynes makes a great deal more sense and that Hayek is a kind of a crank. But on the subject of macroeconomics, not on the subject of the importance of information in markets. Now, but it's very hard to actually land the one view as opposed to another when you can grab hold of facts about what's happened in the past and say, no, this time it's you know, this finding from that time series is invalidated by some difference, and so on. So I think that we actually miss this very, very easy way in which we say science is about the evidence. Well, of course it's about the evidence. There's no question that the discourse of economics or anything pretending to be about the world needs to be in some relation with the evidence. Given that I'm only sort of saying something summary at the end, let me suggest that that analogy might be more better made to say that it's rather like a judge or a lawyer. Their arguments need to relate to the evidence, judgments need to be made, but the idea that the evidence will ever speak and prove one theory over another theory is hubristic and part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Thanks, Nicholas. Anne?
Yeah, I want to disagree with Nicholas there. We do have evidence. We do have evidence of economic systems working and not working.
I conceded that. It's a question of what would make them work better.
Right, there's that, I suppose, yes. But I wanted, because I'm working and I'm just about to publish a book, the case for the Green New Deal. I've spent a lot of time looking at the 1930s. And under Hoover in the United States, the evidence is very clear. Unemployment was really high. Businesses were failing. Interest rates were very high. Defaults, bankruptcies, all of that was going on. And Hoover said, we can do nothing about it. FDR, Roosevelt becomes president, and on the night of his presidency, he begins to dismantle the deeply flawed gold standard. He announces that he is going to that he's demanding that all the banks hand over their gold, and that in future, the United States dollar will not be valued relative to bars of gold, but relative to the health of the economy. He begins to do that on the Saturday night of his inauguration. On the Monday, he calls a bank holiday on the banks, mainly so that they have time to hand over the gold. Citizens began handing over their gold, and he thereby began the dismantling of the global financial system known as the gold standard. It then meant that he was able to then begin doing what was necessary to restore employment in the United States and to tackle their vast ecological crisis, which was the Dust Bowl. And that's what he did. So, you know, he began to use government spending, but also management of interest rates and also management of capital mobility to restore prosperity to the United States economy. And that's what happened. The evidence is absolutely clear. And then, of course, we have the period of 45 to 71, which is the imperfect Bretton Woods system, very imperfect, mainly because of the role of Mr. White in the negotiations. But the fact is, we know what makes economies stable, and we know what creates employment, and we know what creates prosperity. Economists will not stand up and defend those theories or policies for reasons which are, I think, entirely ideological. Because, and for me, the real problem with the economics profession, and this is where the Bank of Sweden comes in, is that it has been captured by the finance sector.
And I'm going to have to, sorry, can I, we're running out of time any moment. So
yes, that's fine. That's all I wanted to say.
Christian, can you have a last word, sentence or two from you, and then?
Yes, I strongly support the establishment of a new price. There we can place all the criticism against the current price. We can establish a more holistic, intelligent, and sound price. And maybe what Andy said at the end, we could maybe even call it for political economy, because there is no single oikos without the polis. And this would be an intelligent re-embedding of the misled economic science into its origins.
Thanks very much, Christian. Now, I'm just going to quickly share my screen to show you where you will soon be able to start adding nominations of people. This is the platform, and to add a new nomination, you hit Add New Idea. You first have to log in, you'll find, but then you can add the name and the title, and then say what was the nature of their innovation, how did it contribute to humankind. You can also add further points for give a location of where they're based or where they were based, and you can also add media. So you can upload an image, a photograph, ideally of the person. You can also upload a video that you could make telling more about the person, or just speech, whichever you want to do, and then hit create. And you'll see I've just created one here. Joe Bloggs created a new approach to be core, and she created an innovative way of supporting collaboration between different stakeholders to promote a circular economy. And I've also got a point down here. This was a new initiative in a crucial area for creating a more sustainable economy. Obviously, Joe Bloggs doesn't exist, but I very much hope you will be able to add other people. If you go, I will circulate the link. Basically, if you go to the Nobel Economics Prize page and hit Get Involved here, it will take you directly to the website. And before we more widely promote it, it would be great to have other nominations up there, so when other people come in, they'll immediately be able to see examples of what people have done. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. This is very much the beginning of a process really trying to get a lot of engagement in this debate that we started about what good economics is. How much is it about doing? How much is it about theory? How much is it about actual real impacts in the real world? And who are the people who are really doing positive things that we need to know about and share and celebrate and learn from? And over the next couple of weeks or so, people will be able to put up their proposals, vote on them, discuss them, add points pro or for other people. You can vote on the different people. And out of that, we'll select the final 3 who will go through to another process of voting, leading to our final event on the 3rd of October, which will be live streamed around the world. So thanks very much. And I look forward to nominations and discussions going on. So farewell for the moment. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.